States. Okay, so this is like from a national to international, was caused largely by the debt crisis. Now, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So I'm going to take a little pause, and I'm going to go back through modernization theory to come up with different ways of dealing with things. Okay, and then we'll just define what happened in the debt crisis, and we'll define what neoliberalism is doing, and then come down to the Senian approaches later on. Okay, is that okay? So first of all, let's talk about modernization theory. What is modernization theory? That's a key part of it, yes. I mean, basically, modernization theory was the way in which people tried to do development in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, based upon usually a rush to get industrialized. Do we know any names associated with modernization theory? Right, well, there's Walt Rostov is a good guy to talk about. And Walt Rostov, I'll show you his book. He wrote a book called Stages of Economic Growth. And this is where I use the internet. And Walt Rostov was a United States economist and he wrote a book called Stages of Economic Growth, which looks like this. Where is it? Here it is. So this is the original version. And you'll notice that it's also called a non-communist manifesto. And I don't think there's any real problem with Walt Rostov. He was a leading economist of his age. And he talked about economic growth as partly a political project to avoid the emergence of communism. Communism is based upon communal ownership of land, but also in the United States, in the middle of the Cold War, this book came out in 1960. The avoidance of communism was considered to be a good thing. And Walt Rostov later went on to be a security advisor to President Johnson during the Vietnam War. And what I'm trying to do here is to demonstrate that a lot of modernization theory was obviously wrapped up in international politics at the same time. Now, Rostov's theory was based upon this famous diagram, which basically said that if you look at different countries, they have industrialized at different times. So this, can you see what's going on here? This is from 1750 to 1950, 1960. And the arrow calls the Industrial Revolution. So these are the stages of economic growth. And he said that countries go through a linear process of economic growth, starting with the Industrial Revolution, then reaching a stage of maturity, which is when you're industrialized, and then you reach the stage of high mass consumption, which is the time when you start enjoying the benefits of industrialization. So obviously Britain developed first, there's the Industrial Revolution, maturity around about 1850, and then high mass consumption around about 1945, according to that, which I think is a bit optimistic, because I don't think Britain was particularly rich in the 1940s. USA starts later, but reaches high mass consumption much earlier. Other countries are just beginning. Canada is an interesting case because they started consuming before they got mature. Now, Rostov's theory was basically that these are the stages of economic growth. Therefore, the state has to organize the economy to achieve this level of economic growth as fast as it can. Therefore, the state has to organize itself to achieve all these different stages as quickly as possible. So what are those stages? Well, this is what they look like. These are the different things. So the first stage is the traditional society, which is based upon bartering, subsistence. Stage 2 is when you start building infrastructure and specializing in certain industries. 3 means that you start to grow the economy, you start industrializing. 4, drive to maturity, basically means that you diversify your industries. And 5 is a high mass consumption, which means that you're living in a consumer society, a bit like the United States in 1960. Now, the obvious point about this is modernization. You know, backwards, bad news, forwards, good news, right? This is a very reductionist view of what development is. It's all about consumption and all about production. But it's also, it's dependent on the role of the state to organize everything. So that the state will, for example, build infrastructure, create certain key industries like the steel industry, the coal industry, the railways, and then in time, you know, everything starts happening. Now that was considered to be the normal way of doing development. That was classic modernization theory, that development is defined as modernization. And modernization means, you know, walking down a path to look like the United States in the 1960s. Cars, hospitals, cities, that sort of stuff. Any comments on anything? Any comments? Any responses? Anybody like this? Dislike it? Nope. Okay.
Was there a lot of economic debate about this theory at the time, or was it pretty much universally accepted?
Pretty much universally accepted, although there were debates about exactly how to do that. I mean, there's also an interesting concept of a dual economy. So the Trinidad-born economist called Arthur Lewis wrote about modernization theory in rural development, where he basically said that the problem with rural areas is that you can't get markets to work. There are too many people, then there's no opportunity cost of labor. So if you walk into, I don't know if we can imagine, a rural area which has got large populations all living together, children work on the land, old people work on the land, people only want to work as much as is necessary to create food to eat. Therefore, you know, there's no point trying to get them to increase their production because they're not going to earn any money from doing that. You know, they will only work for as much as they eat, and that'll be the end of it. So what Lewis said was that this is a dual economy. The urban areas are developed and modern, but the rural areas are backward. We have to introduce new markets. We have to introduce new ways of doing it. So that would be a classic way of doing development theory at that time, modernization theory. It's largely down to the idea that you need to have markets which work efficiently, people need to work for a decent wage, you've got to have infrastructure to allow the markets to work. Now, what are the obvious political problems with a lot of this? I mean, what the usual criticism is that Walt Rostov was talking about modernization theory as though every state can organize this and as though they can simply just create these industries and they will take off and everything is fine. But what was going on at the same time was the growth of dependency theory. So I'll show you how this varies with that. So dependency theory is the idea that you live in a world system where